All right, y'all, welcome to the show. We got a lot to dive into today. I'm finally feeling, I would say 98, 99% recovered from whatever the hell I had. We think it was COVID. We're not 100% sure, but without a doubt, the longest cold of my life. It lasted like 2 full weeks. There were times where I was like, oh, it's going away, and then boom, it would come right back. But anyway, feeling a lot better. So in just a second, we're going to get to an MSNBC host is now fed up with Biden and turning on Biden over a very specific issue. I'll have a lot to say about that. Then later on, I'll give you the truth about LA's wildfires. We'll talk about all the insane conspiracy theories around it. There's a lot to say about that. Sloppy Steve Bannon is now going straight for the jugular of Elon Musk. That's fun. Tulsi infuriated the MAGA base. Joe Rogan decided to jack off another robber baron in front of the world. It's pathetic and embarrassing. And we also have MAGA hack grifter Russell Brand is now coddling MAGA hack grifter Andrew Tate with his attempt to be prime minister in the UK. I mean, it's a real pathetic new low for Russell Brand. So a lot to say about that as well. Everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. That helps out big time. It costs you absolutely nothing. And of course, much love to everybody who supports this show on Patreon. Literally could not do it without you guys. You guys make it function. We are real independent media, not fake independent media. That's why you always hear me bring up, man, I've never had a conversation with a sponsor or an advertiser or a corporation or a billionaire or a foreign government. This is funded from the ground up by you guys and the default ads on YouTube. Very proud of that model. We have no malincentives and misincentives that would push us in a bad direction. And that's why we've remained a consistent voice for over a decade in this game. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So Chris Hayes over on MSNBC, he did actually what I would call a phenomenal segment here, talking about Biden's biggest failure and highlighting something that, look, I don't know, you guys tell me. My instinct is to say if he ran this segment a year ago, he probably would have gotten fired, right? You have Ahmed doing some great work over there on the issue of Israel. You have Ali Velshi has done some good work, but then you also have Mehdi Hassan, who was probably let go because of his criticism of the Israeli government. And so you've had a lot of these characters who know what the correct position is, sort of walking on eggshells to try to make sure they keep their job, but also try to tell the truth from time to time on this issue. So here's Chris Hayes. He has no fucks left to give, and he's going to do a vicious segment here, correctly so, going after Biden over the issue of Gaza. Let's watch.
Since the end of the last World War, there have been basically two kind of competing visions of America's role in the world, at least among the two major parties. There's an international, liberal international view, right? That human rights should matter, that there should be a uniform standard globally that applies to every nation, including us, the U.S., and our allies. A regime of international norms, and most importantly, international law, like real international law, that the U.S. could shape and strengthen. Now, to be clear, I wasn't born yesterday. I'm not completely naive. Yes, that standard is one that is very, very often only given lip service to while the U.S. pursues pure power politics. But it is a meaningful and important standard, as is the aspiration towards reaching it and the people that advocate holding it as a standard. So that's one vision. And then there's a kind of standard reactionary vision, right-wing vision, which is that might makes right. Universal norms are fictions that can never really constrain us. We're the greatest country on earth. And because we are the greatest nation, it's just definitionally impossible for us or our allies to be on the wrong side of international law, which doesn't exist. And that view is strong and has a very long tradition. You could say it might have peaked or reached its apogee in the Cold War under Henry Kissinger, who sold successive administrations on dirty wars and proxy wars, funding, training, and arming right-wing militaries to oppose left-wing governments or activists. He enabled deadly terror in Chile and Argentina and South Africa and Indonesia, where, to be clear, Kissinger's support for a right-wing dictator led to the genocide of 200,000 East Timorese people by a U.S.-equipped army, one of the great moral stains of U.S. foreign policy in the last 60 years. In El Salvador, where U.S.-backed forces fueled a civil war and murdered Catholic bishops, Catholic nuns, and social workers, an outrage that led the Carter administration to suspend military aid to the nation. And as the Cold War finally wound down, there was one lawmaker who made an indelible contribution to rolling back these abuses and attempting to set a standard for American behavior abroad and the behavior of our allies that we armed. That was Senator Pat Leahy, Democrat of Vermont, in 1997.
So-called Leahy Law expands our current law and seeks to ensure the United States assistance does not go to individuals who abuse human rights, to do everything possible to ensure that in our efforts to support foreign security forces that we respect human rights. We also prevent those who abuse human rights from receiving our assistance.
Seems straightforward. Leahy Law barred the Pentagon and the Department of State from transferring U.S. arms to countries that we thought were committing human rights abuses. And that is what I keep thinking of as I process the news that on the way out the door, the Biden administration is going to transfer $8 billion more in weapons to Israel, including fighter jets and attack helicopters, bombs, warheads, and artillery shells. $8 billion in weaponry given over to an ally waging what I think can only be described as total war in Gaza that has, according to, I think, multiple independent experts and reporters and NGOs, been committing war crimes, and ethnic cleansing, according to a former Israeli defense minister, where Israeli soldiers say they have been ordered to target and kill innocents arbitrarily, including children.
I need you to stop and think about the fact that this is now being said on MSNBC. Look at the headline from Haaretz. No civilians, everyone's a terrorist. IDF soldiers expose arbitrary killings and rampant lawlessness in Gaza's Netroots corridor. So this is Chris Hayes on MSNBC, one of the three major news networks, saying the IDF is killing children and they're doing it on purpose. Again, this is something, a year ago, I'm not sure he would say this. He could say this. There wouldn't be backlash. He wouldn't get fired immediately. But now the truth is coming out.
Surely, including children, and that they have used Palestinians as human shields for their operations in Gaza. As whistleblowers and detainees say the Israeli authorities regularly torture Palestinian prisoners. The UN says Israel is using starvation as a strategy in Gaza. Amnesty International says Israel is committing a genocide. Dozens of doctors, nurses, and paramedics who volunteered in Gaza and were there and saw up close told the New York Times they'd seen, as you see the images there in front of you, multiple children who were shot in the head or chest, bullets. And they even brought back the x-rays you're seeing right now to prove it, so people would believe that they had seen children with bullets lodged in their skulls. As Congresswoman Katie Porter pointed out in a House hearing last year, the U.S. ban on arms transfers to human rights abusers, the Leahy Law, has one big exception.
State Department says that aid should stop immediately if there's a problem. Does it?
It totally depends on the circumstances and situation.
Does it depend on the country that's getting the aid?
It also depends on the country receiving the aid, yes.
So what country does aid not stop immediately under Leahy?
I'd have to go back and look through my notes.
You don't know what country that is? It's only one in the entire world. Guess what? Except for Israel.
Even now, former Senator Pat Leahy, who's no longer in the Senate, says Israel is getting a pass in violation of the spirit, if not the letter of the law, that he helped pass. Beginning in the early 2000s, I wrote to successive secretaries of state about the failure to apply the Leahy Law to Israel. Their responses were either inconclusive or inaccurately claimed the law was being applied to Israel the same as to other countries, which the State Department continues to insist today. Leahy added the State Department's dismissive response not only beggars credulity, it also makes a mockery of the law. This is Pat Leahy, liberal senator, not a radical, right? Not a fringe voice in American politics. Someone who knows this issue, who spent decades working on this issue, and not just about Israel, about all kinds of American allies. And yet here we are. President Biden is going to hand a blank check for Israel over to the incoming Trump administration. I don't think it's coincidental that yesterday on Capitol Hill, the House overwhelmingly passed a bill to sanction officers of the International Criminal Court to punish them for moving to charge top Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with war crimes. Keep in mind, the ICC also indicted leaders of Hamas for their war crimes, appropriately, and their holding of Israeli hostages, which continues to this very day. And 45 Democrats joined all Republicans to support this bill. We know which vision of American global engagement the Trump administration will carry out. But it isn't just Trump who this week is making an absolute mockery of every last lecture we deliver to the Russians or the Chinese or anyone else about respecting human rights and international law. It is President Joe Biden, too, leaving a disgraceful legacy. A liberal president doing untold damage to the liberal international order.
Chris Hayes saying Joe Biden is leaving a disgraceful legacy. Did you ever think you would hear those words uttered on MSNBC? This is supposed to be the Democrats' network, the liberals' network. Look, I'm caught between two different emotions here, right? Because on the one hand, I want to say, damn, man, credit where credit is due. You're telling the truth on this issue. On the other hand, I sort of want to shake Chris Hayes and say, where the hell were you a year ago? Where were you? Right? Now, to be fair, I think he's been okay on this issue from the beginning, but did it get the hair on fire coverage that it deserved in real time as we kept seeing women and children getting carpet bombed and we saw literal concentration camps set up and we saw top Israeli government officials sounding like Adolf Hitler on a daily basis? Did he give it that level of coverage? Did he give it the same level of coverage that we gave it on this channel? So I don't know. You tell me, guys. Am I being too much of a hard ass here? Or, what's your reaction to this? Is it like, hey, thankfully he came around and is saying the right things? Or is it like, how dare you? Where the fuck were you when it mattered? Right? I think what happened was I think a lot of people truly believed, myself included to some extent, I thought this was a possibility, that like when Biden was on the way out the door, then it would be like, okay, well now Netanyahu has been undermining me at every turn. He's basically a Republican. He loves Trump. He doesn't support me. He's trying to screw the Democrats. He's been trying to screw the Democrats all along. So therefore, even just from a rank partisan perspective, you could see Biden on the way out giving Netanyahu a big FU. I mean, this is literally what Obama did. You remember this. Obama allowed a resolution to pass at the UN condemning the illegal Israeli settlements. This up to that point, he had vetoed all those. This time, he abstained and let the resolution pass condemning the illegal settlements. That was the sign from Obama. Like, yeah, look, I know what the deal is. I know Likud are basically Republicans. I know Netanyahu is basically a Republican. I know that they're not interested in peace in any way, shape, or form. And that was Obama's way of giving a wink and a nod and saying, I get it, right? But Biden on his way out the door, after getting his eyes spit in repeatedly, genuflects at the altar of Netanyahu and says, here, sir, have another $8 billion to bomb more babies. That was the most biting segment I've ever seen against Joe Biden on MSNBC. I wonder if Chris Hayes is going to be getting a phone call or going to be getting a knock on his door or going to be called into the boss's office, because that's stronger language than I've ever seen in this scenario. Now, let me give you some more information because we keep getting new stuff. So this is in 60 Minutes. Listen to this. The Israelis were using American bombs in some instances to target one or two individuals in densely packed areas, says Andrew Miller, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs. So this is our government saying very clearly they would use these massive bombs to go after one or two people. It verifies that story that we heard early on where they bombed like a humanitarian aid camp. They bombed this giant tent where there were hundreds of people killed to get one Hamas official. One. You remember that? I remember even Wolf Blitzer was on air shocked by this because the IDF spokesperson was basically like, yeah, we killed like hundreds to take out one. No regard for human life whatsoever. In fact, you could argue it was the point. The point is to get rid of all the civilians because in their mind, they say these are just terrorists in waiting. Right? That's how they view kids. Like, oh, this is a future terrorist, so might as well take them out now. This is how they think. Outright genocidal and Nazi-like. Now, again, by the way, I think I'm even harsher on 60 Minutes, right? Because Chris Hayes has, to this point, sometimes said the right things on this issue. But 60 Minutes has been no Warrington. And now, all of a sudden, they should have ran this segment a year ago. They should have done it. All right, let me give you some more. Former U.S. diplomat Hala Rarit says she documented images coming out of Gaza for the State Department. Quote, fragments of U.S. bombs next to massacres of mostly children. And then we have a quote here. I can't play the 60 Minutes thing for you because they're known patent sharks. The question is, when you tried to vocalize what you saw happening in Gaza, you feel like you were told to shut up. And then Hala says, yes, I would show images of children that were starved to death. I was berated. Quote, don't put that image in there. We don't want to see that children are starving to death. She was told later her reports were no longer needed. In other words, you're telling the truth, and we don't like the truth. We want to keep sending money and weapons to Israel, so shut up, and we no longer need you. This is good. This is Joe Biden's legacy, right? This is his legacy. And remember, guys, I'm one of the autistic weirdos who is bizarre enough to get triggered anytime people don't give credit where credit is due on the economic front. I'm the one who's always there like, well, actually, he tried to do student debt reduction a number of different ways. He did $1,400 stimulus checks. He massively reduced the drone war. He pulled out of Afghanistan. He did project labor agreements for construction workers. He raised the minimum wage for federal contractors and employees. He did the CHIPS Act. He did the PACT Act. The NLRB's been pro-labor. He did the infrastructure bill. He did the Inflation Reduction Act. He added 800,000 manufacturing jobs. I'm the loser weirdo who's always really annoyed when people don't give credit where credit is due on the economy, which is unfortunately a very common thing that I come across. But at the same time, when you look at the foreign policy stuff, it's like, if you're being open and honest and direct about this, you got to say, this is war criminal shit. This is like arming and funding Hitler as Hitler does his final solution. And they were clearly eyes wide open about it, man. They were clearly eyes wide open about it more. The Israelis were using American bombs in some instances to target one or two individuals in densely packed areas. We already read that one. And this person says, isn't there something sickening about these prestige media journalists who report on the most obvious and accessible facts in the world a year and a half too late and then sit there all serious thinking they're Woodward and Bernstein? It's true. It pisses me off too. This shitty YouTube show was able to cover this stuff in real time, was able to play the videos in real time of children being murdered. And at the time, mainstream media was, radio silence on it. And if anything, we had a number of reports that showed that the language used for Israeli civilians being killed, or just Israelis in general who were killed, was far more emotive than the language used for Palestinian kids who were being killed by much, much higher numbers. Much higher numbers. Okay, more. This is in Dropsite News. Shout out to Dropsite News. Breaking, a new report by the Palestinian Prisoner Society and the Palestinian Prison Club highlights systematic torture and abuse faced by Gaza detainees in Israeli prisons. The testimonies gathered between January 6th and 8th, 2025, from 23 detainees across the Negev prison and Nafah military camp provide shocking details of medical neglect, severe beatings, sexual assault, and inhumane detention conditions. Here are some of the key findings. Gaza detainees not being held and tortured across multiple Israeli camps, I think it's supposed to say now being held and tortured across multiple Israeli camps, including Negev, Nafah, Sidi Timan, Ofer, and Anata. One detainee, age 45, described being severely beaten, resulting in fractures and burns from hot water. Soldiers urinated on prisoners and threw sewage water at them, according to detainees' testimonies. Another detainee, age 21, spoke about the spread of scabies and worsening medical conditions due to neglect. Prisoners are enduring brutal physical abuse, including prolonged beatings and forced kneeling while blindfolded. At Nafah military camp, a prisoner suffering from cancer was denied urgent treatment. The Red Cross continues to be denied access to the detainees, worsening their safety and well-being. And you can see here a picture of what it looks like in there. Guys, at the same time, we all saw that video. There was a Palestinian being raped to death in a concentration camp with a metal rod by the IDF. And this all came out on video, and you heard crickets from the U.S. government. You heard crickets in the West. Nobody was talking about it, except obviously people online and people with an actual conscience. So again, more from Dropsite. The moment journalist Saeed Nabhan was shot and killed by the Israeli army in Nuseirat camp, central Gaza Strip, Nabhan, a freelance cameraman for Turkey's Anadolu agency, was helping evacuate an injured man when he was targeted by a sniper. So I'm going to give you a warning in advance. I'm about to play this video. I'm going to give you a warning in advance. I'll turn the sound off in the hopes that prevents the video from being pulled down. I don't know if that will or won't happen, but we're going to give it a shot here. But here, I'll show you. Warning. So the shots just ring out. People running. This guy's down. And he's hit. And think about how often stuff like this happens, right? Think about how often stuff like this happens there. And, everything, and I'm ashamed of this too, to one extent or another, that all I can do is give you guys like, hey, here are the numbers. And that sort of seeps the humanity out of it. It shouldn't. If we're all using our minds effectively, if I give a number, everybody should understand that these are tens of thousands of people experiencing hell on earth and being killed and being injured and being maimed, etc., being starved. But like something happens where we don't get enough of the specific stories, right? We have Hin's story, which is super important and people have talked about a lot, but there's literally over 50,000 examples just like that of individuals that have a life, have a mother and a father, or a son or a daughter or their brother or their cousin, and they had a profession and they had hobbies, and all these people are getting murked in front of us in real time, and it's not being talked about in any serious sense. It's become part of just like this just standard operating procedure, and that's shameful. That's utterly shameful. We can get used to anything, any amount of barbarism we could just get used to. All right, more. This one here is from CNN. Gaza death toll has been significantly underreported, study finds. So there's yet another study saying that the death toll has been underreported. So you have, I want to say the UN number is at about 45,000 dead Palestinians. The Euro Med Monitor number is about 50,000 Palestinians who have been killed. And then there was that one study from The Lancet, which said the number is more like 186,000 when you account for the direct war deaths and the indirect war deaths. And, people dying from starvation and malnutrition and disease and stuff. And then you have, I believe this was a different study, another study from The Lancet. And they say that the death count is off by approximately 41%. It's 41% more. So that's now two different numbers from The Lancet that are saying the death toll is actually way higher. And it's historically correct, by the way, in situations like this, to say whatever the number is that we know in real time, it's actually way, way more, because effectively the ability to count this stuff on the ground has collapsed. It's collapsed. And Israel has made it collapse on purpose, also, we should point out. They've gone after humanitarian aid workers. They've gone after World Central Kitchen workers. They've bombed standalone UN buildings on top of the schools and the hospitals and the civilian infrastructure that they do on a daily basis. This is what was going on. While we had Jimmy Carter's funeral and we had LA on fire, the House snuck a vote on saving Netanyahu from his war crimes. The idea was, let's sanction the International Criminal Court for daring to go after Netanyahu. And their argument is, oh, you're singling out Israel. Literally in that same piece, they're also going after Hamas war crimes. So that argument is completely null and void. It's incredibly stupid. They are correctly going after Netanyahu and correctly going out at the Israeli government. So apparently they had to delay the vote because they didn't have enough people. But this is Congress trying to save Netanyahu's ass from the International Criminal Court. This is shameful. This is shameful. 45 Democrats joined every Republican in voting to sanction the ICC because they want justice against the Israeli government. So this is what we're looking at. I'll say it again, man. I'm the guy who comes out here very autistically and explains to everybody, hey, give credit where it's due when it comes to the economic stuff that the Biden administration has done, right? Because I think all the facts matter. But at the same time, my instinct on the foreign policy front, specifically when it comes to Israel, is you got to go out there and call a spade and tell everybody, hey, man, it's a genocide. We are arming and funding a genocide. We're killing tens of thousands of innocent people. By the way, the official number is about 90% innocent people that have been killed. And you all should have known they had no care for innocent people when they did the total siege. If you're going to cut off food, fuel, water, and electricity to over 2 million people in Gaza, clearly you're not trying to go after the 30 or 40,000 Hamas members, and clearly you're not being surgical and precise in your reaction to October 7th. So the idea that this was defensive died a long time ago. Anybody who's paying attention will be honest about that. And now, as you can see, both 60 Minutes has had their enlightenment moment. I mean, they should have ran this a year ago because they had all the information a year ago. But they're being honest now and saying, okay, yeah, we see what this is. We know what this is. And here's a news piece on it. And even Chris Hayes, I mean, these people, Chris Hayes and the MSNBC, they are the front line of defense for the Democratic Party, for the Democratic leadership. And even they are going, guys, who are we kidding? You cannot put enough lipstick on this pig. It is not possible. It is not possible. In a world that made sense, Netanyahu would have been arrested over a year ago. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich would have been arrested over a year ago. We would have been the ones sanctioning Israel and not allowing in military aid, but even other economic aid into the country from the beginning. As soon as we realized, oh, you guys are implementing a final solution. You want to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza. You want to resettle Gaza. Now in the Trump administration, they're going to try to take the entire West Bank too. They're bombing southern Lebanon as we speak right now. They're taking more territory in Syria as we speak right now. A long time ago, you would have said, enough's enough. We're arresting Netanyahu, we're arresting Ben-Gvir, we're arresting Smotrich, we're arresting the IDF commanders and generals who are on the ground ordering the war crimes. We're sanctioning the country. We're going to bring justice to the situation. We're going to actually use our international institutions and international law to go after these cretins and these scumbags and these charlatans. But now, and Chris Hayes made this point, he's 100% correct. Why would anybody take our word seriously about fucking anything? You think anybody's going to take it seriously when we lecture Russia about what they're doing in Ukraine, or we lecture China about their human rights record vis-a-vis the Uyghurs? Do you think any of this stuff's going to land? Even 1%? No. Everybody's going to laugh in our face. And they're going to laugh in our face because we're the most disgusting hypocrites on the planet. From the Iraq war under George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, an illegal war, an offensive war against a country that didn't attack us based on lies, ordered torture to cover it up, which is illegal under U.S. law and international law. We have that stain on our record. And then now we have the relentless arming and funding of a genocide where the Israeli officials are on the record day in and day out sounding like Nazi stormtroopers with what their plans are and what they're going to do. Literal concentration camp set up where they go after children. But on the way out, look, here's the thing. Final point. If even Chris Hayes is saying this at this point, you have MSNBC hosts like Ali Velshi and Ahmed and Chris Hayes. They're coming out there and saying this now. Amnesty International, all the human rights groups have been saying this now for a long time. How do you think the historical record is going to judge Joe Biden? If right now you already have the human rights group saying it and the MSNBC host saying it, how do you think Joe Biden is going to be judged in hindsight, 20 years in the future when we look back? I think we all know the answer to that. And he completely and utterly brought it on himself. There's no two ways about it.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.